The wind cuts across the barren plain, carrying with it the sharp bite of winter. A small clan huddles together, their last scraps of food gone days ago. The mother holds her child close, listening to the hollow echo of hunger in his stomach. Beside her, a hunter scans the endless whiteness, searching for movement, for life, for hope. The silence presses heavy, broken only by the whisper of the cold. Each face carries the same question, unspoken but burning. How far will they walk? What risks will they take? When survival is slipping away, life in the Stone Age was a constant struggle against a world that offered no promises. Food was scarce, appearing and vanishing with the seasons, and weather shifted without warning. Winters were long and merciless, freezing rivers, killing plants, and driving animals into hiding. Summers brought brief abundance, yet even fertile lands could turn barren after storms or droughts. Every sunrise carried uncertainty. Would the hunt succeed? Would the fire hold through the night? Would the children wake to another day? Survival meant gathering roots, berries, and whatever the land gave. But when those gifts ran out, hunger pressed hard. In this fragile balance, life and death walked side by side, shaping every choice early humans made. For early humans, nature dictated every step. Summer heat dried rivers to cracked earth, leaving fish to vanish with the water. Winter locked lakes in ice, sealing away life beneath frozen surfaces. Even the herds that fed them never stayed still, chasing grass that shifted with the winds. To survive, humans became relentless trackers, reading the ground for hoof prints, watching the sky for signs of change, and memorizing the growth cycles of plants. But this was no grand journey. It was necessity carved into bone. To stay was to starve. To move was to hope. And so, season after season, the earth itself became their master, teaching survival through its unyielding rhythm. Then came the silence, the moment when hunger sharpened its edge. Herds that once thundered across the plains had vanished into distance, and plants lay buried beneath frost, lifeless and unreachable. Around the fire, families whispered the same haunting question, move or die. To stay meant certain starvation, yet the road ahead was filled with predators, rival clans, and landscapes unknown. Fear pressed down like a weight, but necessity demanded courage. In that breaking point, migration began not from adventure, but from desperation. Migration was never a choice, it was survival's demand. Feet became humanity's first true tool, carrying clans over rivers, plains, and mountains. Every step was a wager against death, yet each journey forged paths for those who followed. What began as hunger turned into discovery, shaping minds and bodies alike. This restless drive to move, born in the Stone Age, became the engine of human evolution, an unbroken legacy of endurance. The valley trembles beneath a storm of hooves. A herd of mammoths surges forward, their massive forms blotting the horizon, while behind them sprint a band of hunters, breath burning in their chests. Stone-tipped spears gripped tight. Dust whirls into the air, stinging their eyes, but they do not falter. Each stride is a gamble with exhaustion, each heartbeat a reminder of what hangs in the balance. Failure means empty bellies, weakening children, and the shadow of death creeping closer. Yet in this desperate chase lies more than hunger's answer. It is the proof of courage, the will of survival, and the fragile future of an entire clan. Survival demanded more than strength. It demanded patience and watchful eyes. Early humans became quiet students of the wild, following the great herds as if reading from an unwritten book. They learned the signs, the trampled grass where mammoths had rested, the broken branches marking a herd's passage, the subtle shift of seasons that signaled migration. These discoveries were shared by firelight, woven into stories that bound generations together. Hunting became more than pursuit. It became a test of memory, teamwork, and foresight. Trackers traced footprints through mud and snow, while toolmakers sharpened blades for the moment of need. What began as instinct grew into strategy, turning desperate chases into calculated hunts, proof that survival was as much about intelligence as it was about courage. Every hunt was a journey into uncertainty. Hunters set out across endless forests, treacherous valleys, and frozen tundras, their breaths sharp in the air as fatigue gnawed at their strength. But nature's cruelty did not walk alone. Other predators shadowed the same herds. Saber-toothed cats stalked silently in tall grass. Wolves trailed with cunning patience. And bears claimed territory with ferocious strength. To pursue the prey was to challenge these rivals, risking becoming the hunted. Cold winds froze exposed skin. Hunger dulled reflexes, and spirits strained under the weight of failure. A single misstep could spell disaster, not just for one hunter, but for the entire clan. Every chase was survival balanced on the edge of danger and hope at last. The chase narrowed to its decisive moment. The hunter's strength alone could not bring down beasts that towered above them. Victory lay in cunning. They shaped the land into a weapon, driving herds toward cliffs where thunderous falls sealed their fate. In other hunts, flames and shouts turned valleys into cages of panic, hemming the animals inside. Every heartbeat mattered too soon, and the herd would scatter. Too late, and the prey would trample the hunters themselves. Spears were readied, nerves stretched taut. Survival hinged not just on muscle, but on discipline, coordination, and the fragile line between triumph and ruin. The valley thundered with chaos. Spears struck, hooves collapsed, and the great beasts fell. Relief surged through the hunters, their cries of triumph mixing with the rasp of exhaustion. The clan would eat, children would survive, and another season was secured. Yet each victory carried them farther, driving footsteps into valleys unknown, over rivers untested, across mountains unseen. Hunting was more than survival. It was momentum. In chasing the herds, humanity unknowingly began chasing the horizon itself. The earth stirred awake as spring arrived, green shoots piercing the soil, rivers bursting free from their frozen cages, and herds returning to graze on fresh meadows. For Stone Age families, this was salvation. Bellies filled, spirits lifted, and the world briefly felt generous. Yet behind every bloom lingered a shadow. They remembered the silence of winter, the forests stripped bare, the fields emptied, the air thick with hunger. Nature's gifts were fleeting, its generosity never without cost. Each sunrise carried both promise and threat, a reminder that survival depended on respecting the cycle of seasons that ruled every step they took. To live in the Stone Age was to read the world as if it were a vast calendar written in wind. Water and stars. Hunters watched the skies for the sweeping arcs of migrating birds, knowing they foretold the path of herds. Gatherers studied the first blossoms of wild plants, signals of when food could be found and when famine loomed. Elders, the memory keepers, traced patterns in the heavens, passing down the wisdom of constellations as maps through the darkness. These signs were not curiosities, they were lifelines, etched into stories whispered by firelight. Survival demanded faith in tradition and instinct, for in a world without compasses, the earth and sky alone pointed the way forward. Summer's generosity filled their hands with fruit, fish, and game, but its promise was always temporary. As autumn's fires dimmed, winter claimed the land with silence and ice. Rivers once alive with fish hardened to glass, and forests that teemed with berries offered nothing but brittle branches. Families wrapped themselves in hides, walking across frozen rivers and jagged mountains, chasing the fading scent of life. Hunger pressed upon every step, and storms stripped away strength. Yet still, they moved driven not by choice, but by necessity, bound to the relentless rhythm of nature's wheel. Where survival meant enduring both feast and famine, the cycle did not always follow its rhythm. Droughts cracked the earth until rivers became scars in the soil. Storms swept through valleys, drowning the land in sudden fury. Winters sometimes refused to release their grip, burying families in endless cold. Entire clans disappeared, swallowed by forces beyond their strength. Yet others survived, guided by instinct and unity. They built sturdier shelters, mastered fire against the darkness, and moved at just the right moment. Nature's cruelty became their harshest teacher, shaping resilience sharper than stone. Every step carried weight. Parents chose which path might save their children, while elders urged the weary forward. Infants were cradled across frozen rivers, their cries swallowed by the wind. Migration was not only necessity, it was sacrifice bound with courage and hope. Those seasons ruled their fate. They forged strength from struggle. Nature pressed hard, yet in yielding and adapting, humanity discovered its unbreakable will to survive. They gathered where the land seemed to end. Before them stretched rivers that foamed with violent currents, mountains crowned with ice, and horizons swallowed by restless seas. Fear pressed heavy on their chests, but behind them lay hunger, emptiness, and death. No map guided their path, only instincts sharpened by survival and stories spoken by firelight. Each step forward meant venturing into a silence no one had ever crossed. Yet hesitation carried its own price. To stand still was to starve. To move was to risk everything. At these edges, humanity learned that survival demanded courage, and courage demanded the will to face the unknown. From Africa's cradle, humanity began to move. Families pressed into deserts, where heat shimmered like fire, across grasslands, where winds cut the skin, and into tundras where the air itself turned against them. Instinct demanded invention. Rivers too wide to ford were crossed on rafts bound from wood and fiber. Animal hides were stitched tight to hold warmth against bitter cold. Fire blazed not just for cooking, but as a shield against prowling beasts. Every horizon unveiled fresh dangers, yet also fresh promise. These were not aimless wanderings, but choices shaped by hunger, thirst, and the search for shelter. With each step into the unknown, migration became more than survival, it became humanity's first act of discovery. As humans pushed into unfamiliar worlds, the land itself became a test of survival. Europe's frozen plains turned breath into ice, while Asia's jungles swallowed paths with vines and shadows. Where predators lurked, on distant islands, storms raged, flooding the earth and sweeping away fragile shelters. Wolves hunted in packs, frostbite stole fingers and toes, and monsoons threatened to drown entire journeys. Yet in the face of these trials, people adapted. Stone chipped into sharper blades, bones carved into needles, wood bent into shelters against the wind. Some clans vanished in the struggle, but others endured, bound by resilience, transformed by necessity, and prepared for horizons still unknown. Fear was constant, but so was the will to move forward. Parents cradled their children while stepping into landscapes no ancestor had ever seen. Hunters stood against predators larger and faster than themselves, their spears the only barrier between life and death. Mountains loomed, seas stretched endless, and tundras swallowed their horizon, yet clans pressed on, bound by unity stronger than terror. Each step was defiance, each crossing a gamble. In those acts of bravery, humanity stretched its reach, continent by continent, forging a destiny of survival. Migration was never chance, it was hunger. Pressing forward, seasons pulling the clans, and determination lighting the way. Each crossing carved new chapters, footsteps spreading across deserts, forests, and coasts. From Africa's cradle to the edges of the earth, these journeys built the foundation of humanity itself. They were not wanderings into emptiness, but beginnings. Each horizon crossed, shaping culture, survival, and the enduring story of what it means to be human. We are all children of migration. Every breath we take carries the memory of footsteps pressed into earth long before our time. From Africa's sunlit plains to Europe's frozen horizons, the journeys of our ancestors wove the threads of the human story. These wanderings were not just about survival, but about courage, endurance, and the hunger to see what lay beyond the horizon. Migration was never only movement, it became the inheritance of humanity, the very foundation of who we are today. Migration was more than a search for food, it was the forge of culture. Each step into new lands demanded fresh skills, the ability to track herds across vast plains, to store precious food against lean months, to stitch hides into clothing that shielded against burning sun or cutting frost. Fire became both weapon and warmth, while tools sharpened into lifelines. Out of necessity, voices turned into language, carrying warnings, strategies, and stories. Families grew into clans, bound by trust and survival. Movements scattered humanity across continents, but in that scattering, the first sparks of culture and identity were born. For countless generations, movement was life, yet in time, some footsteps slowed. Fertile valleys promised more than the chase. Seeds pressed into soil yielded food that stayed. Rivers gave fish that returned, and shelters rose that could outlast storms. Farming did not arrive overnight. It crept in, reshaping the rhythm of existence. Villages grew, fires burned in the same hearts, and trade bound families into communities. But the old instinct never vanished. Even in settled lands, the call to journey echoed, whispering humanity forward. Each migration was more than survival, it was discovery. With every step, humans pressed into landscapes no ancestor had dared to tread. Rivers once thought impassable were forded. Mountains yielded to persistence, and vast oceans became paths rather than barriers. In these crossings, knowledge expanded, languages spread, and new tools emerged. What began as necessity grew into exploration, reshaping both land and people. Each journey carved history into the earth, proving that humanity's greatest advances were born from footsteps into the unknown. The road of migration has never vanished, it has only changed its direction. In the Stone Age, our ancestors followed herds across endless plains, chasing survival with every step. Today, though the paths look different, the reason for movement echoes the same. Families still leave homes behind in search of food, safety, or the faint promise of opportunity. Refugees fleeing war, workers crossing borders, and dreamers chasing new beginnings carry the same fire that once guided hunters beneath cold, starlit skies. Each departure carries both loss and hope, just as ancient travelers left familiar valleys. Unsure if they would ever return, modern migrants carry stories folded into their heart songs, languages, and memories of the soil they left behind. The landscapes have shifted, from icy tundra to city streets, but the emotions remain unchanged. Fear of the unknown, hunger for survival, and a daring belief that the next horizon may hold a better. Life. Migration is not just movement on a map, it is the engine of human progress. It shapes the blend of cultures, the rise of civilizations, and the very identities we claim today. From the deserts once crossed by caravans to the crowded airports of the present, humanity has never stood still. The story of migration stretches across time, binding ancient wanderers to modern travelers, reminding us that our journey has no final destination. The footsteps that once pressed into frozen earth still echo, carrying us forward into a future yet unseen.